15 years into working at Homeboy, you discover that it really was about healing. It wasn't about employment. Employment's always been a piece, but the idea was, an employed gang member may or may not go back to prison, or an educated one may or may not. But a healed gang member won't ever reoffend, ever.
Before we jump into today's episode, I want to encourage you. If these conversations are meaningful to you, then please take a moment to subscribe to the Follow Forward podcast. Our heart is to share real stories, noble voices, and Christ-centered servant leadership from people who are living out the gospel in authentic and often challenging ways around the world. So wherever you're listening or watching this podcast, hit subscribe, share this episode with someone who might need it, and journey forward with us. This is season 2. It's Real Stories, Real Voices, Christ-centered servant leadership. I'm your host, Tim Tucker, and today we're connecting all the way to Los Angeles, California, to meet a man whose life has become a remarkable testimony to the transforming power of compassion. Our guest is Father Greg Boyle, Jesuit priest, author, and founder of Homeboy Industries. What began as a small effort to provide hope and opportunity has grown into the largest gang intervention, rehabilitation, and re-entry program in the world. Every year, thousands of formerly gang-involved and previously incarcerated men and women walk through the doors of Homeboy seeking a second chance. Father Greg, it's an honor to have you with us today.
It's great to be with you, Tim. Thank you.
This is the Follow Forward podcast. The whole idea is to present stories of hope and transformation of those who are seeking to follow Christ, who become an inspiration to others, with the whole idea that followership is actually critically more important than leadership and who we are following. But I want to say and open this up by Father Greg is that I'm here in Cape Town, South Africa. We run something called Gangstar Enterprises here at the Message Trust, and we've been greatly inspired by you. And I want to say that imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. So we've done what best to imitate some of what you've done there in California. And also, I've got your book here. I've read Two's on the Heart. This was very formative in some of my thinking around this area of rehabilitation, reintegration, compassion, and kinship. And we'll get into all of those topics. But the first question I've got for you, Father Greg, is where did all this begin? How did this journey of 1,000 steps begin for you? I believe it was way back in Boyle Heights, or maybe before that. Where would you say the backstory really began?
In the city, I was a very young pastor. We had 8 gangs at war with each other in the housing projects where my parish was. Then I was burying kids, which started in 1988. And then it was rapid burials. And so we started a school and then started a jobs program. But it was always just responding to what was right in front of us. It wasn't me thinking, how can I solve or address the gang issue in Los Angeles? It was just my parish. It was just my particular geography, these 2 very densely populated public housing projects. And so that because I really admire the focus of your podcast, which is, about following and about going forward. I was thinking the other day, I used to always say that the 2 marks of authentic discipleship are joy and fearlessness. But I added a third one, which is, I think, and moving forward.
Mm.
Because sometimes we get into this frightened stance that wants to go backwards. If
Yeah.
only we recreated, the church of 1954. I mean, I think that's really an emphasis for some people. Why would we do that? And part of the expectation in following is that we're moving forward. We're putting
Yeah.
one loving foot in front of the next.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think that's
Yeah.
kind of essential.
Yeah. And I think having that kind of entrepreneurial pragmatism seems to be common in the kind of founder that you are. You're seeing a need and responding to a need, but in a way that is not just um, a uh, a practical response, but more than that, because you're dealing with issues of the heart, issues of the soul, and and a very much embodied response. And so, I mean, one of the things I often quote you with the phrase "nothing stops a bullet like a job." And so how did that emerge in terms of this, seeing the need, having I mean, I've read the book, having the heart broken in terms of the number of burials, the kind of gang warfare that was going on. When did it move towards this being a pastor who is now creating opportunities as a direct intervention?
Yeah, because I never thought that's what we were doing, so it's one thing to kind of just respond to what's right in front of you. And then maybe, in retrospect, you look back and you say, oh, it was an entrepreneurial spirit that was moving this. And perhaps, but that was never on my mind, you know. I bet we could be entrepreneurial, in addressing this. But part of the thing for me was always was knowing that gang violence was about something else,
Right.
that it was about a lethal absence of hope. And once you know that, you go, oh, so let's infuse hope for folks for whom hope is foreign. And then watch what happens to the violence over here. It turned out the violence was about something else
Right.
because
Yeah.
all around you, you found people trying to address the violence head on. And the interesting thing about that is it's self-congratulatory. Well, you can do what you're going to do, but I'm going to address violence head on. And I go, good luck with that
Mm, mm,
because it's about something else. And that's why we spin our wheels on so many things,
mm,
like racism, for example. I'm going to address the hate, but nobody healthy hates. So if you address health, watch what happens to hate.
mm,
But we
mm,
we always think it's really a kind of then it becomes about us. I stand against hate or I stand against gang violence. I go, well, okay. I'd rather kind of do something that's effective.
mm, mm,
And then so once you know that it's about something else, then you can address that thing,
mhm.
and but it's kind of exhilarating in a way because we're so stuck in this idea of all these vexing, complex social dilemma that we want to address, but we're not very effective because everything's about something else. So
Yeah.
I that's my mantra is find the something else. Just
Mhm,
find it. And once you can find it, then you can roll up your sleeves and say, "Okay, we're going to do this." So jobs kind of began in the beginning because gang members told us if only we had jobs. But 15 years into working at Homeboy, you discover that it really was about healing. It wasn't about employment.
mhm,
Employment's always been a piece, but the idea was, an employed gang member may or may not go back to prison, or an educated one may or may not. But a healed gang member won't ever reoffend, ever.
mm, mm. So in that sense, the when I visited Homeboy, and also I'm currently reading The Homeboy Way, by your colleague and CEO, um, and it's more about the environment and the ecosystem than the actual activity. Or how do you balance those 2?
Well, I also thought, like if you listen to gang members, they'll tell you, I need a job.
Mm,
But if you know gang members, then you know that healing is the thing that will enable them to be employed, but also keep them from getting locked up.
Mhm. Mhm.
That it's about wound and brokenness, and how do you make friends with your own woundedness so that you can transform your pain, and so you don't have to transmit it anymore. And that's
Mhm.
the idea, that's the hope, is that we can get to a place where we're more sophisticated about the root causes of things. So probably, 20 years ago, we became really healing centered. We were job centric before then, but now we're healing centered.
Mhm.
And that has made all the difference. So therapy, groups, the environment that we create here where people feel safe and seen and cherished, all that leads to a place where people um, are able to uh, become whole.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
and then if they do, then they're going to be good employees. And if
Yes.
they do, they're going to be great parents.
Mhm.
They'll be able to parent in a way that they hadn't been parented. So there are all these byproducts of somehow where the healing will impact greatly, how people respond and how people can move forward, in their following, as we
Yeah.
suggested.
It's, I mean, we're based here. This is an Africa-facing podcast that we hope uh, encourages people around the world as well. But one of the things we're seeing in this context is an epidemic of fatherlessness. I've been in prison this year in 4 different African countries, as well as in the States. And I was struck by something you wrote that said, in the soul of nearly every homie I know, there is a hole that's in the shape of his dad. Um, and so would you see that as one of those root causes of brokenness? And how do you find healing when it goes so much back to the roots, the soul of who somebody is?
Well, if it's true, as I believe it is, that no hopeful kid has ever joined a gang, being fatherless can contribute to a sense of somebody's despair or inability to conjure up an image of what tomorrow might mean. So, but it doesn't necessarily mean, because I know a lot of folks who grew up in the projects who didn't have a father and they didn't join a gang. And the thing that seems to account for that is if they were hopeful. So maybe with their single mom, they were struggling like everybody, but they also got to a place where they could imagine a future. And however you account for that, But if somebody is fatherless and the mother is either frightened or frightening, then it's hard to kind of find your way. But, generally speaking, there's a kind of an ingredient, if somebody doesn't have a father, if a male doesn't have a father, then the degree of difficulty has been magnified in your ability to navigate your life. And I think that's pretty much true. Uh, it's not always true, but it's pretty much true.
And so how have you, because finding healing in that, some might just say, well, we need surrogate fathering, but perhaps it's more complex than that. So, you talk about kinship a lot as one of your recurring themes. Why, firstly, maybe describe what that kinship or how that helps in that process of healing, and the role that that plays in unconditional acceptance.
Yeah, I always also think of it in terms of service. So, like service is good and people should be engage in it, but service is the hallway that leads you to the ballroom. And the ballroom is kinship, a place of connection and belonging. And so that's what the hope is that people will get to that place where they become resilient and sturdy as a result of having found themselves in kinship with other people, then they know how to proceed. But then service, it's, I mean, people who are in a position where they can be of service to other people, as long as you know that the goal is to get folks to relational wholeness where they're connected to other human beings. And because that's when people become fortified and able to move beyond, and knowing that the world's going to throw at them what it will, but this time you're not going to be toppled by it because you have a kind of renewed sense of sturdiness and resilience, and that's kind of the hope. But it's interesting because, a lot of times gang members, when people, especially the outsider view, says, oh, kids join gangs, because they want to belong. But that just comes from, well, that's how outsiders see this. Sometimes it's colored by gang members who say, I just wanted to belong. But that's only because they can't talk about what they're fleeing. No gang member is seeking anything when he joins a gang. They're all fleeing something. But it takes a while for people to no longer be strangers to themselves, where they can say, oh, I can see now I was fleeing, the house where my, you know, stepfather was beating down my mom, and I couldn't be there. And that's harder to say. Instead, they say, I joined a gang so that I could be accepted and belong. Kids who want to belong, they join the Little League or the Boy Scouts. But if they join a gang, it's because on some level they want to die,
Right.
because they know that this will lead to death or to prison. And they know that, I mean, though they may not bring it so fully to consciousness.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's an interesting perspective. Here in Cape Town, the gangs say there's one door in and only one way out, and that is death. And is known from initiation right the way through, but I've never heard it spoken about as starkly as you've just said it. Because even if the death being sought is not necessarily physical death, it's often a death to feeling. Or would you say that there's a death to even feeling or existing? And I guess drugs and things play into that
Even
along the
even
way.
when we talk about love and we talk about unconditional love,
Hmm.
but the love within a gang is really quite conditional.
Yes.
There are a million ways that you can uh, be a foul of the group. Gangs are really one false move organizations. There's nothing in a gang that's no matter what. It's conditional. So you have to behave and you have to do what the gang expects you to do.
Hmm.
And if you don't, then there's major rejection.
Hmm.
So it's kind of difficult because you will hear gang members sometimes characterize their involvement as, oh, the gang had my back, and I could always rely on them. And and that, they would say, was experience of love, but it's highly conditional. Anyone who joins a gang encountered their life as a misery, and misery loves company. And it takes a while here for
Hmm.
gang members to be able to assess and talk about their lives in a
Hmm.
way that's honest.
Hmm. So how do you engender trust then? Because in that kind of world, trust is in some ways non-existent when when acceptance is conditional, the things that you've said, there's this deterioration and complete corrosion of trust. What has Homeboy been able to do, and what have you learned relationally to help build trust?
One of the marks of health and wellness and wholeness is an ability to trust. People who are trusting aren't gullible, or you can pull the wool over their eyes. No, but healthy people are trusting people. But if homies can't trust, and they can't do that readily, that's an indicator that wholeness and wellness and health is not exactly in place yet. So that's what happens here. People come in and they're distrustful, especially folks who've been in prison for a long time. You can even see them. Their backs are against the wall because they always have to have an eye on the whole room. Otherwise, it's hard for them to trust the room. But in no time at all, they can they don't have to do that anymore. And they become more trusting, not because suddenly they're naive. They're more trusting because they're gradually becoming healthier people. And you foster that not by teaching it, but by if if it's true that the traumatized are likely to cause trauma, then it has to be equally true that the cherished will be able to find their way to the joy there is in cherishing themselves and others. So everything's a byproduct. If people feel safe and seen and loved, then their ability to trust will grow exponentially. And that's part of the idea, is to create a cherishing community where people feel like, oh, I belong here. And I feel like there's a kind of no matter whatness that it really quite doesn't matter. I feel like these people here will have my back.
Mhm.
Even if we have to ask people to leave, which happens, we'll say, oh gosh, we think you're great. We love you. Come back when you're ready.
Mm.
And then they come back. So most of the people who run this place now are folks who had to leave
Mhm.
and then came back when they were able finally to surrender to their own healing.
One of the things I loved is your perspective on success. Now, you quote Mother Teresa that it's more about faithfulness than success. But I also like that you're honest with what may be perceived as failures. That sense that when someone has to leave Homeboy, but also, I mean, the number of funerals you've had to attend and people you had hopes and dreams for, and now you're the one having to preside over their funeral. Um, and so, how have you managed to maintain your own healthy perspective and your own sense of health when you're immersed 24/7 in the work that you've been doing for now 30 plus years?
Failure is not part of the vocabulary, but neither is disappointment or setback. You just do the next loving thing. And that's all you can do. And otherwise, all the measuring is really so short-sighted. It's like, what's all the measuring about? Because in all organizations, you know, people sometimes will pound the podium and say, this program works. And I always say to myself, yeah, but I bet it doesn't help. And you realize that not everything that works helps, but everything that helps works. And so you want to do the thing that actually helps. Otherwise, you get caught up in measuring outcomes. And first of all, it's a terrible way to live that will lead to burnout, but it doesn't make any organization more effective because we're focusing on outcomes. I suppose there have to be people somewhere, even in this organization, who kind of have a tally sheet and they try to figure out how will they measure success for our clients. But I'm just not that interested in it because I think it shifts your focus. Because if success is your guiding light, then watch what happens. You're going to only work with the most likely to succeed, as opposed to what we do. We want to really accompany the people who are having a hard time and are difficult to deal with. Because in the end, what does behavior have to do with goodness? Nothing. And all behavior is an indicator. So if somebody has a fight right now in our reception area, well, you want to find the thorn underneath. You want to say, what language is that violence speaking? And how can we get underneath it and do what is helpful? And that's the goal.
Yeah. One of the things I wanted to talk about was we've spoken a bit of time naturally speaking about the homies and the gangs and those you're engaged with on a daily basis. But at the same time, this is the Follow Forward podcast. We're trying to influence thought. And we know that there's so much stigma associated with those caught up in crime, in gangs, and the kind of lifestyle we've been talking about. And you've written and spoken a lot about compassion. So how do we motivate compassion? Have you seen a shift in the needle through your storytelling? Is there evidence that those who maybe previously would have written off what we call in our organization the so-called least, last, and lost, those that the world has discarded to a large extent, are we seeing, and particularly in the church, in the Christian community, are we seeing a shift in the needle towards compassion, or is there any evidence or sense that that could be happening?
Yeah, I mean, I'm hopeful that it's happening. The minute you start to know that the answer to every question is compassion, then it kind of unlocks a door where you can say, wow, this is where the joy is. And this is where my confidence in love really prevails. I was on a podcast not that long ago where I said, quoting Paul, saying, love never fails. And the host said, well, my audience is going to think you're very naive. And I remember thinking about it, and I said, well, I don't know. Can you name a time when, love failed? I don't think anybody can name a time, but they can name times when it wasn't embraced, or when we didn't try it, or we tried it and then we stopped. But where love actually failed, I don't think we can identify a time when that's true. And I think that's important because what we've lost really is a confidence in our love, you know, that it's really, kind of essential. And so there's a kind of a thing that keeps us from, as I would say, rolling up our sleeves and actually working, is that uh, we don't fully believe that everybody is unshakably good with no exceptions. And we don't really believe that we belong to each other with no exceptions. But once we know that to be the case, then we roll up our sleeves. We don't get stuck where we just throw up our hands and we just go, I guess there's nothing we can really do to address this social dilemma.
Mm,
But, but, love is always the next thing to do when we feel that we're at a loss.
I think to tie this into where I am in South Africa, I had a question for you, Father Greg, if you've heard of the phrase Ubuntu.
Oh, yeah, very much so.
So would you see that as akin to kinship, the same kind of, I am because we are, I am a person through other people for our context? Is that the kind of emphasis you have?
Yeah, and it's such a rich concept that the whole world could learn from you
Hmm.
folks,
Hmm.
because it's really, it gets at something really quite deep and meaningful.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's the hope. That's the goal. That's where you want to
Hmm.
be.
Hmm. And if the Apostle Paul said love never fails, then we look at Christ, don't we? Because what seemed like a failure on the cross was actually the embodiment of love. And you say that compassion was the wallpaper of Jesus' soul, the contour of his heart. It was who he was. I'd love to hear something more, again, the example of Christ. Paul said, I follow my example as I follow the example of Christ. We might say, follow Father Greg's example as he follows the example of Christ. How has that sustained you over your life of ministry?
But even in the the invitation to follow, it says, take up your cross.
Mm.
And we say to ourselves, oh, great, Jesus is inviting me to suffer. But really, Jesus is just inviting you to follow. And so there's a difference there, So in, in and I think we kind of backed the wrong horse, whenever way back when was
It
probably
was
when
probably
when
before you or I. Must be before you or I.
well, definitely that, but it was like, when the empire embraced Christianity because they were at a crossroads, where Christianity ought to be an invitation. It then became an indictment. So we had a kind of a are we are we inviting or are we indicting? And I think the church kind of said, well, let's indict because we're more likely to fill churches if we're indicting people. But that's just because we didn't have confidence in how powerful the message was. In the end, Jesus is the end of his life. He's saying that you may be one. So he knows that our kinship and connection is vital. And then it says, my joy, yours, your joy complete. So it's about joy
Mm.
and
Mm.
fearlessness and moving forward.
Yeah. Well,
So
it's when bums on seats becomes the level
that's
of
right.
success, doesn't it? It comes back to
That's
that
right.
very much like
Yeah.
definition of success
Yeah. We
rather
would say
than
we would say butts, but
that's
bums works too.
and I think that's coming again, it links into service, doesn't it? Because, recognizing following Christ is a call to serving self-sacrificially, which is actually the pathway to joy.
Yes, that's
Because
that's
with
the key. That's the key
yeah,
part because the harder thing is not the better thing. It's just the harder thing.
yeah,
But the joyful thing is really, Saint Ignatius of Loyola, the founder of the Jesuits, he has this meditation called the Two Standards, and in it he says, "See Jesus standing in the lowly place." And I always I'm so moved by that because you're visualizing Jesus. He's standing in the lowly place where the people on the margins are. And then it forces you to say, why would he stand there? He's standing there because that's where the joy is. That's that's why he wants to be there because he knows that that's where you're going to feel, the depth of connection, and the utter fullness.
mm,
So it's about joy, and it's too bad that that's almost been effectively eliminated from the quest.
mm,
It's all if it's painful, then it must be you must be on the right path.
yeah. And so I guess the invitation of Christ in that place is to all of us again, isn't it? Wherever someone might find themselves on their continuum of their faith journey, someone might be listening to this and they've plateaued or gone backwards, like we said right at the beginning. The invitation still stands, doesn't it? To step into that place, into that space.
It does,
And that's where
but again,
transformation happens within us, doesn't it?
but you don't go to the margins to make a difference because then it's
No.
about you. But
Yeah.
you go to the margins so that the folks at the margins make you different. And now it's about us. Now it's exquisitely mutual, where you're delighting in the person in front of you, and that's eternally replenishing. You're never going to burn out if that's your mindset, where you're just trying to live in the present moment and to be the tender glance in the world. So you notice the notice of God, and then you choose to be that notice in the world. And so you want to be able to experience fully the joy of that. And it's not about deprivation or what you are being denied. It's really life in its fullness. And um but we don't trust a lot of that stuff. We have to grow and trust to know that this is where the joy is. I want to be where the joy is. And a lot of times people talk about, God called me to this place. Well, I mean, God is only calling any of us to where our heart is and where the joy is. It's not possible to say, I really want to be a teacher. I find so much joy as a teacher, but God wants me to, do that. And no,
Deny,
that's not how it
deny the
works.
deny the joy in our giftedness in order to,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's just not how it works. I mean, that's how you know what God is calling you to do or to be, because you're being guided by the joy of it. That was an old mindset, but it was there, where I'm being called to deprivation and horror, but that's God's will for me. And you just go, no, it's never God's will for you.
Mm,
Never.
mm.
It's how you know that that's not accurate, is because you're supposed to go where your heart finds the most joy. And that's how God kind of activates our own knowledge of w- what we ought to do next.
I think that's a lovely place to sign off, that we follow God into the place where our hearts can find most joy.
That's right.
And thank you, Father Greg, not only for being an example in that, but also for finding language to articulate it that is so helpful for me, and I'm sure now for so many others. I wish we had time to go into stories, because I know you're a wonderful storyteller, but if anyone's not come across you or Homeboy, they can go online. They'll be able to find stories for days. I remember your TED Talk, which has had over 500,000 views, I noted earlier today. So it's a great place to start and to hear some of those wonderful stories. Also heartbreaking stories, and in that, see the formation and transformation of Christ at work in your life through you, through Homeboy, and in many likewise. So thank you so much, Father Greg, for being on the Follow
Thank
Forward
you, Tim,
podcast.
and I look forward to being in person with you one day over there. I'd love to know your country.
Yes, we'd love you to come and visit. Well, this has been the Follow Forward podcast, real stories, global voices, Christ centered servant leadership. Please stay tuned for more conversations exploring how God is at work across nations. And don't forget to subscribe and share this episode with someone who believes in the power of hope, compassion, and second
Today's
chance.
conversation encouraged or challenged you, don't forget to subscribe to the Follow Forward podcast so you never miss an episode. We're sharing real stories, global voices, and Christ-centered servant leadership from people making a difference on the ground around the world. Subscribe, share with a friend, and help us keep these stories of hope, redemption, and transformation moving forward.